So the first thing to do is somebody sent an email with a question. So I thought I'd just start in that way this evening, and let's see what your thoughts are. I've certainly got some thoughts about this question. So the question is, I have become concerned about bad karma and worrying about the results. Is that actually causing more bad karma? Is it better to focus on good karma through right thought, intent, and action rather than become focused on the bad? So that's a first conundrum for this evening. I have become concerned about bad karma and worrying about the results. Is that actually causing more bad karma? Is it better to focus on good karma through right thought, intention, and action rather than become focused on the bad? Okay, so my immediate thought there is yes. Yes. There's no way we can avoid experiencing the results of our past actions, both good and bad. Okay, so in Buddhism, we look at life as having two aspects, an active phase and a passive phase. And so when we act, that's the active phase, that's us generating new karmic action. And then there's the passive phase, which is what comes back to us, what we experience as a result of past actions, and that's what we call the result of action. So there's action, and then there are results of actions. We experience the results of actions as the kinds of sensory phenomena, the five physical senses and mind, the contacts that arise. So we experience those along with the feelings and perceptions that arise with them, and the tendency to the way we tend to react in response to things. So as we're going through our lives, it is inevitable that we will experience the results of past actions, both good and bad. And when we experience the results of bad karmic action, it means that we experience an increase of suffering, an increase in painful feelings and unwanted perceptions based on the kinds of experiences that we're having. So it's inevitable that from time to time we will experience the results of past inefficient actions, so actions that were based in greed, hatred, and confusion. And that's true for all of us, up to and including the Buddha himself. So even the Buddha, even though he was a fully enlightened historical Buddha, he still could not escape experiencing the results of his past actions. It's just that he was no longer producing new actions. So how are we then therefore to navigate our way through the world, knowing that we can't escape experiencing the results of our past actions? Well, the Buddha's recommendation was to generate as much good action as you possibly can. So the results of bad past actions rely on the supporting conditions. So if you make the supporting conditions as positive, as benevolent, as kindly, as friendly, as helpful as you possibly can, if you keep precepts, if you generate compassionate activities, if you meditate, if you practice mindfulness, if you practice loving kindness, they're all super high-powered positive actions that create this sort of the supporting conditions are so benevolent that if the opportunity for a negative resultant to arise, it's arising in this sort of field of positivity, and therefore the effects are heavily influenced by that positivity. So the Buddha used the analogy of putting a pinch of salt into a glass of water, and it renders the glass of water undrinkable. But if you put the same amount of salt in a freshwater lake, it just dissolves into nothing, and it makes absolutely no difference whatsoever. So we want to make our lives as positive as we possibly can. And the Buddha's mundane teaching gives us all the tools that we need to live a life of positivity. And therefore, when those unfortunate resultants do arise, you know, they're falling into this huge lake of good intention and good action, and therefore the results are ameliorated. So that's my initial thoughts. Has anyone got any other ideas in addition? Anything to add to that?
Maybe just that the worry creates a new habit and doesn't really fix anything. Life doesn't throw anything at us that we can't handle. And yeah, every one of us is going through a series of pleasant and unpleasant experiences throughout our lifetimes. The greater acceptance there is, the less difference it makes, and the less inefficient response there is. But
would you say, Jim, in your experience, that by acknowledging that these are indeed results of prior good and bad actions, that has influenced your ability to accept what's unfolding?
Absolutely. Yes, you can understand it in a different way. It's not life being nasty to you. It's just phenomena happening that I need to experience in order to grow. I mean, there's still pain, but it's at the same time, the pain, when it's fully accepted, isn't as painful. And you notice that it's also short-lived typically, that it's not as bad as I was fearing. It's much more manageable than I thought it would be.
There are definitely some things that that really push the envelope in terms of what we can handle, and you know, it's but I think generally speaking, if you live a life dedicated to the development of mindfulness, to the intellectual study of the Buddha's teaching, and that through those two processes you begin to marry your experience to your intellectual map making, you start to recognize how it is that resultants arise from sensory contacts. That process over time, that brings mastery of action and result. Also, you start to recognize in your own experience what are the actions that actually make life more challenging for you in terms of their results, and what actions lead to a more benevolent, kindly perception of the world. And you just start naturally to choose the latter over the former. And so life starts just magically, almost organically heal and become a lot more peaceful and calm, and without those. And so you find then you are able to acknowledge more easily the more difficult side. But this is why I include, you know, your comment about the worry. That's why I include the tendency to respond habitually as part of the resultant side of things. Right. So the underlying tendency towards reacting in a certain way. So, for instance, if you had an issue with somebody at work, say, and there was an argument, you were angry and irritable with them, the likelihood is when you remember that, so that memory is the resultant arising now with a painful feeling and unwanted perceptions, either of that person or of yourself. And then there are the habitual reactions to that, which might be the habitual reaction to try to justify why you were right and they were wrong. Or it might be the arising of a habitual tendency towards self-criticism and self-hatred and a feeling of self-disgust for having acted like that. or perhaps the arising of, concern about the way you might be perceived by other people because of that. And so there are all these reactions that, if they're not attended to mindfully, then become the basis for new inefficient action. And so it compounds the problem.
Joe, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something that helps me in regards to, dealing with the worry and the fear of having to experience the resultants of bad karma is, I always remind myself that everything is transient, including, you experiencing those. And it's like going to the dentist. Nobody wants to go, and then everyone's always worried about the pain that they're going to experience when they go, but it's a necessary thing to go through, and that it won't last forever. So you might as well, not worry about it and get it over with. And something else that I always remind myself that is, adversity is always an opportunity to learn, and learn about transience, learn about being more mindful, especially during really hard times. And that's always helped me a lot.
Yeah, very, very good point. All very good points. One of the key takeaways from following this path is that everything is transient. And if you recognize that these resultants, because they're transient, that they don't actually define you, that memory of that event does not define you, that even the habitual tendencies that want to arise now and take over and lead you down the wrong route, they don't define you. None of it defines you. You're indefinable. These are just conditioned events occurring in succession. And if you're mindful of them, and if you are able to discern the transient, ungraspable nature of this phenomena, you just let go. And letting go is this really curious phrase, which essentially means allow it to be there, knowing that its nature is to, as it were, self-liberate, as the Tibetans say. So all these resultants will self-liberate if you let them. And that's what letting go means. It's letting go of trying to control them, and instead just be mindful of them. And they pass away themselves. Good. Any other comments?
Helen, go for it.
I just wanted to share the wording in the question. What came up for me was the notion of there is a right choice and a wrong choice. Like, is it better that I do this? Or is this what I should be doing? And the judgmental notion that's in there, that one way to be having my reactions is correct and the other way is not correct. That's not how it was worded, but and I think you just answered that, Paul, in the sense that everything is neutral. It just is, and you just need to come to learn that. I just wanted to point out that I was perhaps seeing some of the right and wrong. There's a good way to be and a bad way to be in the wording of the question.
Very good point. Very good point. And it's really, really helpful to bring out the fact that we can only really learn through making errors. So it has to be a process of trial and error. Therefore, this idea, well, should I, if I behave like this, then I'll never have to, I'll never make a mistake and everything will be fine. And whereas we know that the path is a very messy affair because human emotions are very messy. We're messy human beings. And so we are allowed to fall down again and again and again. And it's through falling down. You remember the poem about walking down the street and falling down the hole and not knowing how you fell down into the hole. It's that. It's like you scramble out of the hole. You think, well, how on earth did I get in there? Next day you walk down the same road and you fall down the same hole. But you just catch yourself as you're falling down the hole and you realize, oh, it is. I am doing it to myself. Nobody's doing it to me. I'm doing it to myself. And gradually you start to recognize, on subsequent days, you start to recognize the whole approaching as you're walking towards it. And then one day you manage to walk around it and you don't fall in. And that's the process. So it's an organic development. And what allows for that development is the willingness, firstly, to take responsibility for action and result, i.e. not blaming the world. And secondly, mine gone blank. Hang on, there was another one. Secondly, yeah, generating the mindful noting that allows you to discern all of this. Yeah. So the more you discern all these different parts to experience, the more you start to recognize patterns, you start to recognize the order of events. And it's through that that the wisdom's developed. I mean, because that's another way of putting the question, isn't it? How do you get wise? Has anyone got any other questions about that? Or do you have another question you'd like to ask? We're all practicing contentment. I've got another question from Wednesday night I could ask. If there's no one's putting their hands up. Okay. I really like this question, actually. It gave me pause for thought. Please, can you talk about neuroticism and the training? Does it not end at enlightenment? That's got you thinking, isn't it? Please, can you talk about neuroticism and the training? Does it not end at enlightenment? And this did give me quite a lot of pause for thought. Well, one thing that struck me was that I think people fall into the trap of believing that enlightenment confers this sameness to anyone who discovers the truth. And whereas what I've discovered through reading the Pali Canon, from knowing people that have finished the training, is that no two people are the same at all. And the quality, so much of the qualities that they possessed before they finished the training, they still possess after the training. And this, the word neuroticism reminded me of, in psychology, they have the 5 main character types, don't they? Openness, conscientiousness, being extrovert, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And so they're all on a sliding scale, and we all have those qualities to some degree. So somebody who's very, very open to change, are sort of progressive in nature, are innovative and daring in that kind of way. Whereas you, at the other end of the spectrum, you'll have somebody who is very traditional, conservative with a small c, perhaps doesn't like change, wants to keep things the same. And we all fall somewhere on that spectrum. And the same with the other ones that we listed. So like agreeableness, some people are very gregarious and they're the life and soul of the party. Oh, that's extrovert, isn't it? Agreeable, they want to get along with everyone, they want everyone to have a good time. And then you get somebody at the other end of the spectrum who, if needs be, isn't afraid to be dislikable, if need be. And so everyone is somewhere on that spectrum. And the same with being neurotic. Like, there are some people who are naturally nervy. There's sensitive people, they're nervy, and at the other end of the spectrum, it'd be somebody who is very emotionally settled and, you know, flaky at one end of the spectrum and kind of grounded at the other end of the spectrum. Now, the interesting thing is, well, what happens after enlightenment? Does all that go away? No, of course not. What happens is that those personality traits, those aspects of personality, are just seen by the enlightened being to not be self. It's not that they go away, it's just that they're not self. There is no self nature in any of it. And that got me thinking about the Buddha's chief disciples and the difference in character between, say, Sariputta and Moggallana and Ananda. Ananda, for instance, would have been very high in agreeableness and extroversion. So he was the Buddha's attendant, personal attendant, and so he would act as the interface between the Buddha and the wider community. So he was a very agreeable, he wanted everyone to get along. He was, you know, he was a very sociable chap. So he had those kind of qualities. Sariputta was extraordinarily conscientious. He was analytical by nature. Moggallana, he wasn't as conscientious. So Sariputta was really good at insight. Moggallana was really good at samatha. They had different personalities, both before and after enlightenment. The enlightenment had nothing to do with it. So there was also the case of the enlightened monk who would just be really, really short with everyone and go, "Hey, you, go and do that. Hey, you, go and do that," and was really short with everyone. So he was low on agreeableness. But the Buddha maintained that he was indeed enlightened. So someone's enlightenment cannot be seen through their behavior. It's impossible. You can't. Even the Buddha himself said, "I'd need to live with someone for 2 years, you know, like and gauge their behavior very, very accurately for a good couple of years before I could make a determination, unless it was somebody he had trained. If it's somebody that you've trained, then you've gone with them through their journey to finally realizing the truth." So, and I think that's really important to remember. Like when I was under training, I would look at Alan very closely, my teacher, and I'd be assessing, well, you know, I think that's probably an aspect of his enlightenment, and that's an aspect of his enlightenment. And after I finished the training, I discovered no, it had nothing to do with it whatsoever. That was just Alan. That was just the personality of the person. That was just his conditioning, and it had nothing to do with enlightenment whatsoever.
Sorry to interrupt, Paul. I think there's something going on with your audio. Getting a lot of static there. I know you're using.
Is it happening right now?
Yeah.
Static.
Yeah, whenever you talk.
Okay, you're getting a different microphone now.
Yeah.
That's better.
Okay.
Cool.
So did I just say lots of stuff? Nobody knows what I just said.
It was
No,
only
we
a
heard
few
it.
seconds.
Okay. All right. I think somebody's got a hand up. So does somebody have a hand up? Joe.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, is this topic in relation to the difference between conventional and ultimate reality?
In what way? What's the thing?
Well, what would you say, because it's about neuroticism and whether or not that kind of goes away or is quote unquote fixed, you know, before and after enlightenment. Would you say that neuroticism and the concept of it and everything is just within the bounds of conventional reality and not necessarily with
Okay,
ultimate reality.
very good point. What I'd say is that the conditioning towards being nervy and sensitive doesn't change, because that's just part of the conditioning of that person's character. But what does change is there's no longer any clinging attachment to it. There's no making it worse and worse and worse and worse. All that happens is like, well, for instance, like I've got a nervy aspect to my character. Like before any kind of public speaking, I will get quite nervous. I'll get nervous about how many people are going to attend a meeting. But what the difference is like there's the total knowledge that the idea that I get nervous is not correct, other than in a conventional sense, and that's devoid of any inherent reality. So there is just the conditioning unfolding because the supporting conditions allow it. But there is no passionate resistance against that. So I will experience that and then it passes away. Yeah, so I'd say that's the difference. So if somebody's introvert by nature, whilst they're working at the path, they will still probably prefer their own company and a hermit's life after enlightenment. They won't suddenly become somebody else, is what I'm trying to say. So do you see the difference? Yeah.
Yes, that makes sense. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah. So I'd say, so with somebody who has neurotic tendencies, from a Buddhist perspective, you don't have to solve that. You just have to be able to manage it when it arises. So if you're inclusive of these qualities and you don't fight against them, you learn through observation that actually they're not me, they don't define me. And you observe them, then you master them. It's not like it will go away. I mean, there are basic character aspects to our character that aren't going to go away. Not for the duration of this lifetime. They're like deeply embedded core character traits, but they're neither good nor bad. They just are. Any thoughts? Sally.
Sorry, it's me again. I just keep thinking as you're talking about the idea of the self, and it's something that's been bothering me quite a lot for about 3 or 4 days now. Thinking about past actions and future actions, which was the question that I was asking earlier. If things have affected you from previous lives, I still can't get my head around the concept of what is it that continues from life to life if it's not a self. And I'm sorry, I feel quite embarrassed asking that question, but I struggled with it back in my A-level. I could never get my head around what is it that's moving from one life to the next.
Yeah, very good question. And it's a question that foxes all of us. And really the true resolution of that question comes from applying oneself to the path, to developing mindfulness, and actually seeing the process unfolding moment by moment. There are analogies that we can give, and I imagine you've probably heard a lot of them. One that I like is just thinking about a pile of carefully stacked coins, and each coin has a relationship to the preceding and proceeding coin, but it's not the same coin. So the coin doesn't actually move up the stack, but it does have an influence on the coin next to it. So
Okay.
it has a relationship to it. And what you
So do you look at it as layers? Is it like layers just building? Is that how you would view it?
I tend to view it more as a river. And the river, the conscious experience is like a river that is just endless. It has no first beginning and no end point. And within that river, you have this process of relationship. So, for instance, like because there's a mind and a body, and there's like the sensitive matter of our senses, we experience contacts, sensory contacts. And because we experience sensory contacts, there's the arising of a feeling. Because there's a rising of a feeling, there's a rising of wanting to do something with that feeling, either keep it and make it last or try to get rid of it. And so you start to see there's this process of relationship that's pushing the river along. Yeah. So the something that you did in the past is only waiting for the right supporting conditions, and it produces its result, and then you react to the result, which creates new action that has to produce a result. But there is nothing actually that moves through. So another analogy I use is like people, we think of a necklace, a pearl necklace, that we see that there's, okay, so there are all these lives which are like the pearls on the necklace, and we assume that in life there is something that runs all the way through those pearl necklaces that holds them together. But it's not actually the case. It's just this process of conditioned and conditioning, this process of relationship. That's the best I can do on this occasion. So
yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
It's all built on relationships. There isn't anything, conditional relationships, there isn't anything that runs through it that is unchanging. I don't know if anyone else in the group has any other analogies, illustrations that they can remember or bring forth.
Yeah, for me, it's almost like a TV show where the show just keeps going, but it's never the same episode. It's always changing constantly. That's the best I got. It's a very difficult topic to explain.
It is a very
right?
difficult topic because it's further complicated by the fact that in conventional terms, we talk about the self. But that's really what we're doing there is it's a shortcut concept, word, to try to explain something which is extraordinarily complex. So in conventional terms, yes, we talk about the self, and we have this idea of unchangingness, that there is something unchanging in the flow, and that's myself. Where when you practice mindfulness, what you discover, there is just the flow of changing elements, but it all hangs together. And it's a complex set of conditions, but it all hangs together. And the reason why the Buddha wanted us to look at it all of this is because we're constantly adding this extra element, the self, the idea of self, it throws everything out of kilter. And that's when we suffer. So we suffer when the more self-view there is and the more self-concern there is, the more we feel separated off, and the more we feel we have to do something to become whole. Whereas when you realize that there isn't actually a thing called a self, there's intelligence, there's love, there's poetry, there's beauty, there's all kinds of things, but there isn't a self, and life hangs together without it. You're taking out of the equation the thing that was causing the disruption and the confusion. And so life then just flows beautifully. But the whole purpose of following this training is to discover the truth of that directly. So, oh, we've got some hands up. So Roland.
Yes, thank you, Paul, everybody. Yes, it's a question that dogged me for many years. I think an analogy that always meant sense to me was imagining a candle that's lit and a second candle that isn't lit. If you light the second candle and then blow out the first candle, if you like, the first candle is a previous life, and the second candle is a completely separate candle, separate life, but one could not have existed without the other one.
That's an excellent analogy. Yeah. So is it the same flame or is it a different flame?
I think the energy of the flame has passed from one to the other, but no, it's not the same flame.
It can't be the same flame because it
not
doesn't
the same
have
flame.
the same conditions. It doesn't have the same wick, doesn't have the same wax. Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
It's not the same flame, but one could not have existed without the other.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, very good.
Yeah.
Lynn Q.
Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, the way what I find helpful is looking at it from what is the same, say in me or in a person, to when you're a baby. So when we were babies, everything, all the physical side was completely different. The mental side, thoughts and everything. There's nothing the same now as when, say, I was a baby. So I find that helpful because there's the expectation that, well, that was me as a baby, but you already explained it by saying there's no self anyway. But this lifetime, looking at this lifetime and how it changes helps me a bit.
Yes, no, that's excellent. That's excellent. And again, you can see that we uphold this sense of the idea of something that is unchanging, that passes through time. But in terms of absolutely everything that we can turn our attention to and know, because this is a really important point. You have to know what the self, to believe that there is a self, you have to know what it is. You have to be able to witness it. If you can't witness it, then you're just telling stories. So it has to be something that you've seen. It has to be something that in experience that you're saying, yes, that's the self. Otherwise, it's just a fairy story, a fairy tale. So what is it? And that's the thing. That's what insight training is getting us to. Is getting us to see that it all hangs together through conditions without the necessity for that unchanging Lin. So the name Lin doesn't change, but it's referring to this ever-changing set of conditions. Excellent point. Sarah.
Hi. Yeah, I like the similar analogy of a light bulb, similar to the candle, that a light bulb will blow, but there's this kind of flow of electricity, which then a plugged in new bulb is like the new life. But there is definitely a relationship to the last bulb. Yeah. And I was just thinking what I found really useful over the years of trying to get to grips with what is meant by rebirth, because it's so foreign to us. We don't grow up with these stories, is literally reading stories of people who remember their former birth, had that either in present day or in the Buddha's day. There's meditators, and also the actual recorded Jataka tales that the Buddha is reportedly talking about former lives of his own life. And it kind of gives you reasons as to why the person now is acting in the way, it's because in a former life they did X, Y, Z. And just reading loads of those, that really makes sense why we don't know why one person is like this and another person is like that, but they do have these tendencies there. And like they give the example of also how can it be that you can have a Mozart being able to play amazing music and compose at the age of 4. It's like, it makes sense if you've got former lives building up skills and things like that.
No, very good point. So in order to get an overall sense of how it might work, And I like Sally's question. It's a really intriguing question, because, you know, it's like it's an easy answer to say that there is something unchanging, but even if there was something unchanging, how would it carry these talents? How would it carry these talents through death and rebirth? Does it have pockets? Does it, you know, it's like does it have a bag, luggage? How does it carry all this stuff through? And then when you start to, you know, you start to examine your actual experience, you start to realize that nothing in your experience is actually passing through time. There, not a moment of consciousness, nothing. Everything arises and passes away and is replaced with some self-similar pattern, but it's not the same pattern. Lucy, perhaps we'll make this the last point. Lucy.
One way I think about it is I kind of don't, and I just think, well, the Buddha seemed to be right about a lot of things, and everything I've been able to experience of what he has said turns out to have been right so far in my life. So until I find out that he's wrong about something, which hasn't happened yet, and coupled with the fact that he said it's a good idea to keep open at least to the idea of rebirth, and the fact that he says there's no self, I'm good with just taking that until I'm enlightened, and then it'll all make sense. For me, I'm just good with him saying that, and so far he seems right, and reduces suffering by following what he says and everything. So I don't need, so far on that topic, I don't need more on that one.
Brilliant, excellent point. And I agree. Like I think it was the Dalai Lama said, you know, if science proves the Buddha's teaching to be incorrect, so be it. You know, it's like, that's the beautiful thing about the Buddha's teaching, is that it can remain lovely and open, and doesn't demand that anyone believe us or believe the Buddha's teaching. And if something comes along, if someone could come along after however many hundreds of thousands of years of human existence, having failed to discover this self, who could come along and point out exactly what it is, and we'd all know, then great, so be it. But nobody does. It all remains this sort of like this unprovable, assumed aspect that we all just fall, you know, generally speaking, we just assume that, oh, that's just the way it is. And it does require a lot of specific work to actually undo that assumption. And so to have faith, and to be able to have faith in what you have discovered so far as corroborating what the Buddha taught, you know, that was definitely an aspect for me, which was like, well, given everything that I found out is true about the Buddha's teaching, why would I think that the rest wasn't true, that I hadn't discovered firsthand? And that's the beautiful thing, you discover it firsthand. You do not have to rely on belief. Just having an openness, an open mind, an open heart, a willingness to be wholehearted in your approach to the Buddha's teaching, and finding out directly. Well, it's gone past the hour, so I think we should call it a day there. Thank you everyone for your contributions. Hope you found some of that helpful, thought-provoking, and I haven't worked out what date the next Monday session is. Is it the 28th? It'll be the. Hang on, can I find my? Does anyone know what?
The 6th of March.
That's the 6th. Okay, brilliant. So we'll reconvene online then.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yes,
Thank you, Paul. That was
Thank
great.
you, Paul.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very
Good
much.
night, all.
Sorry, the sound went a bit.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
very
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.